So we're entering now. It is now officially Tu B'Av, with the Mishnah and Tanis at the very end of Masechet Ta'anit tells us an incredible thing, that the greatest days of celebration in the Jewish calendar were Yom HaKippurim and the 15th of Av. A great, profound celebration that takes place on this day. And to access just a little bit of what exactly are the themes that we have the ability to tap into on this day, so we'll do our best. Zrat Hashem. I'm reading from the Rif in Maseches Brachos on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Tanu Rabbanon. First, the Rif quotes the Gemara. It says, Seder Birkas Hamazon Kachi. This is the order of the blessings of Birkas Hamazon. Rishona Birkas Hazan. The first blessing is the blessing on sustenance. Shnia Birkas Haaretz. The second is the blessing on the land itself. And Shlishis Bonei Yerushalayim. The third one is the blessing on Jerusalem. Revias Hatov Ve'ametiv. And the fourth blessing is blessing God for the good who gives out good. It says the Gemara, Ubeshabas Maschil Benachama Umesayim Benachama. The third blessing on Shabbat takes on a slightly different form. Instead of focusing on the theme of Rachem Na Hashem Elokeinu, it focuses on the theme of Nachem, not mercy, but consolation. So says the Rif, how is it that you are meant to structure this blessing? If it shifts from Rachem to Nachem, how are you meant to enunciate the bracha, to say over the bracha? So says the Rif, She'omer, Nachamneinu Hashem Elokeinu b'vinyani recha. Console us with the building of your city. Umesayem b'nechama. And how do you end off with consolation? She'omer, v'ha'aleinu l'socha v'nachamneinu ba. That you should bring us into the city, and console us with it. Ki ata Hashem ba'al hanechamos. Because you are the master of all consolation. Baruch atah Hashem menachem amo Yisrael b'vinyan Yerushalayim, the one who consoles his nation of Israel with the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Now, what is very, very astounding to note over here, this is a very, very old nusach of this bracha, right from the time of the Gaonim. There are many Rishonim that hold that this is the definitive version of this blessing. The Gra also brings this in his Siddur Lahalacha, that this is what you should say. Also, it's mashma from the Rambam slightly like this, although he doesn't bring this in his Siddur. But be that as it may, the point is that this blessing of Nachem, Menachem Amo Yisrael B'Vinyan Yerushalayim, that is meant to be said every Shabbat, is the blessing that we say on Tisha B'Av. As we know, right, a week ago exactly today, and Mincha on Tisha B'Av, you augment the blessing of Bonei Yerushalayim. You don't say Baruch Atah Hashem Bonei Yerushalayim. You say Menachem Amo Yisrael B'Vinyan Yerushalayim, or some version of that God consoles the Jewish people with the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And this theme of Nechama, which is what we are now very, very firmly into, even this whole period of time leading up to the Yomim Noraim, is called traditionally in the Jewish calendar the Shiva de Nechamta, the 7 weeks of consolation. This is a whole period of this energy of consolation. And the question is, what is consolation meant to be? What is consolation supposed to be? So one could say, I believe a little bit superficially, that consolation means essentially pain management. A person suffers a tremendous catastrophe, and they're grieving, and they're tormented over the loss and the catastrophe. And nechama is some form of dampening that anguish. And when that anguish is dampened, so that's called, you've experienced nechama, you've experienced consolation. You've lessened the degree of the suffering. However, a very, I believe, even superficial assessment of what the theme of Nechama is shows us that there's a much deeper understanding of what is being communicated to us. And very often, I think, in the vast majority of cases, if not all of the cases, when we're trying to understand the theme of any given concept, all we need to do is look at the words. Everything is in the words. We're learning now Reish Milan of Rav Kook, so it gives us tremendous insight into the power of Lashon HaKodesh, of the messages that are contained within, and not just on a mystical level, but even at the most simple basic level. Things that on the surface can seem very complicated and obscure are in fact very, very straightforward. And we just have to look at where this term nechama is used, how it's used, and what the context of it is used, and we can draw from there the common denominator. What is the very first time where this word nachem this shoresh, this root word, nachem, is used in the Torah? Huh? Oh, that's Friday night. Okay, so yeah. Don't worry, it's not going to all be a repeat of Friday night, I promise. Yeah. At the end of Bereshis, at the end of Sefer Bereshis, when God sees how the world has descended into irredeemable corruption, so bad that He needs to literally destroy the world and start over, right? Kinichamti, right? Vayinachem Hashem, right? God, He experienced nechama on the world, nechama, regret, in the sense that God was he was so hopeful for the world, and now He's in the state of regret that He ever started the project to begin with. What is the connection between the nechama that a person experiences after tragedy, God forbid, and this nechama, this nichamti, right? Vayinachem Hashem al hara'ah. We find later on in Sefer Shemos, God regretted, or He changed His mind, perhaps, on the evil that He was going to bestow upon the Jewish people right after the sin of the golden calf. What is this idea of the similarity between changing one's mind and consolation after tragedy? So the common denominator, as I heard from one of my teachers, Rabbi Shapiro Zatzal, who experienced the tragic death of one of his daughters very early in life, who he actually named his yeshiva Shev Shmaitata after her. The initials Shev are the initials of his daughter, and he said that the idea of nechama means to shift someone's perspective. That's what it means, to shift perspective, to approach something differently. Right? God had high hopes for the world. He was very optimistic about the world. He wanted the world to grow and to thrive and for everything to be good. And now He's looking at the world. He said, like, this is not what we had in mind at all. And He had a different approach. He had a different approach to the world. God was initially in a state of wrath of the Jewish people for building the golden calf. And Moshe talks him down. And v'nicham Hashem al hara'ah. And He has a different approach. Now He has a different approach to the Jewish people. He had one approach before, and now He has a different approach. Nechama is the same thing. Our nechama, the consolation, is having one approach to the experience of tragedy and then having a different approach to the experience of tragedy. It's a shift in approach. It's a shift in approach. You know, we see in the Rambam has an incredibly powerful statement in his Perush HaMishnayos at the very end of Maseches Ta'anis, discussing this day of celebration of the Jewish people. Ubachru Yom Chamisha Asar B'Av. Why did the Jewish people decide for the 15th of Av? Already, that's an interesting chiddush. This day it's like an organic holiday. It's not mandated by the Torah. The Jewish people decided collectively this day is going to be a day of celebration. So why did they choose that day? The 40th year of the desert, the Jewish people, they right. The Magefa, the plague that was killing off the generation that left Egypt, it stopped on the 15th of Av. As Chazal tell us, every year on the 9th of Av, there was a tremendous plague that swept through the people, and there would be tremendous death on that night. And on the last year of the sojourn in the desert, Nistalka, it stopped. There was no death. That last year on Tisha B'Av, there was no death. So they thought, well, maybe we got the dates wrong. Maybe tomorrow is really Tisha B'Av. V'himtinu, so they waited ad chatzi achodesh, until the middle of the month. In the middle of the month, you can see the moon is full. You know it's past the 9th of the month already. Ad chatzi achodesh. Ve'az, and then batchu benafsham, they had faith in their own souls. Ve'ha'eminu ba'atzmam, and they believed in themselves. V'hirgishu bo ratzon habore, and they felt the renewed will of the Creator, meaning that the Creator wanted them again. V'hashavas apo v'siluk chamaso, and the end of His wrath. V'lefikach, and for this reason, osu oso misham v'hala yom mishte v'sason. They made that day forever a day of celebration. He says mishte v'sason, a day of party, of having a party. Right? It sounds almost like Purim, like right, a day of mishte v'sason. What the Rambam is saying is really remarkable. All of the additional historical backgrounds that Chazal give for what took place on this day, even what the Mishnah itself says that they had the little speed dating dance party on that day. Right, all of that is saying that came afterwards. That came after all that, meaning they established all these things took place on Tu B'Av because of the original Tu B'Av. The original Tu B'Av in the desert before they even went into the land. It's fascinating it's interesting to recall the Targum on Megillas Eicha. And Perek Aleph of Megillas Eicha says that one of the great tragedies of Tisha B'Av, in the Chorban Bayis Rishon, the first destruction of the temple, the destruction of the first temple, one of the great sadnesses of that year was that there was going to be no Tu B'Av celebration. Every year there was a Tu B'Av celebration, but even this was before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. But because that year the city was destroyed, they were being dragged into exile. They missed Tu B'Av that year. That was one of what?
That was a focus. Right?
Well, that was one of the huge tragedies that they were going to miss Tu B'Av that year, right? It's like we know what that means to experience this thing of losing out on a Yom Tov. A Yom Tov is lost, right? Like we know what that feels like. But this is the root of the Simcha of Tu B'Av. The root of the Simcha of Tu B'Av is regaining confidence in oneself. That is the root of Tu B'Av. There's a powerful midrash Sifri on Parshas Bahaloscha that it takes a very sharp detour for the topic of the parsha. This is on the mitzvos of the Chatzosros. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to build trumpets that are sounded at different milestones during the year. During the festivals, when God forbid there's a calamity, right? You sound a certain type of tune with the trumpets for calamity. We talked about that in Hilchos Tanis. When there's a fast day, when there's a public fast day on some type of calamity, so you're meant to blast these trumpets. And also B'Yom Simchaschem, when there's a national victory. When there's a national victory, you're supposed to take out the trumpets and blast this happy tune with the trumpets. Yeah, and Rosh Chodesh as well, right? B'Yom Simchaschem u'B'Moadichem, as the pasuk says. So on this pasuk, the Midrash takes a detour of discussing the halachic technicalities, and tells us a story about what took place as the Jewish people were going into the land in the time of Yehoshua. Like 40 years after this event. So he says the Jewish people at that time, when Yehoshua gave them the word to enter the land, right? Achzu ba'aron HaKodesh, they grabbed the Holy Ark and they declared, Avoseinu chatu umesu b'midbar. Our forefathers, they sinned, and because of that, they got their just deserved, and they're not going into the land. Aval anu lo nechateh, we will not sin. V'lo namus, and we will not die. V'nirash es Eretz Yisrael, and we will inherit the land. You see this very, very powerful contrast already in the shot of the Psukim. The orientation of the generation of the Midbar that was constantly complaining. They were constantly at the brink of breaking apart. Every small little thing, every bump in the night, every little detour, what they thought was going to be, everything was an excuse to complain and want to go back to Mitzrayim. That was the generation of the Midbar. However, the generation that goes into the land with Yehoshua, you see in the very beginning of Sefer Yehoshua, he comes to them and says, "Listen, guys, Moshe isn't here to take care of us anymore. It's all on us." And they say, "Yes, we're with you. Everything you say, we're going to do. And anyone who challenges your authority, he'll be punished, right? And we will follow you. We will follow you to the gates of hell." Basically, this is an incredible contrast between the generation of the Midbar that were kind of petrified. They were in a constant state of distress. Between this next generation that were able to develop this powerful belief in themselves, right? Nechama doesn't only mean being able to look at the situation differently, but it also means being able to look at oneself differently. And as I told on Shabbat, I'm sorry, maybe that you have to hear the story again twice. But as I told over on Shabbat, I'm being encouraged recently to give over some personal accounts recently. The moment that this message was instilled in me of Techama took place 3 days into the beginning of the war. When we were all down south, a unit was activated already on Simchas Torah, and everyone was down south. And we had been given my specific unit had been given the job of doing patrols around Be'eri in the hopes of deterring any further incursions into Israel. And there were many other incursions that were attempted to break in the week following the Simchas Torah tragedy. And we were in Be'eri. We're in Be'eri with all the destruction that was still there. And we were given a specific job to find if there was any hardware or supplies or material of Tzahal in the area, to try to account for it and to try to bring it back. And we knew that there was a specific armored vehicle called a Namer, which is basically a tank minus the turret. It's the It's the vehicle that the Golani guys ride around in. It looks like a spaceship inside. It's unbelievable. And it had received an anti-tank missile, a direct hit by an anti-tank missile, and it was sitting in the middle of the field. So we had to go find this thing and try to bring it back. So they knew that I had experience with some vehicles like this, not this particular vehicle, but vehicles like this. And I approached the vehicle, and I could see that there's a hole that was bored through the back of this vehicle. So we go over to the door. I open the door. I pull it open, and there's no one inside. There's no one inside. The whole interior of the vehicle was shot out and black and blown to bits, but there was no one inside. Right? Some Hamas terrorists thought that it was a target and fired a missile at it, but thank God there was no one inside. And I walk in. Right? I'm trying to play around with it to see if it will move, and I realize I'm not going to be able to figure it out on my own. And as I'm playing around with it, desperately trying to get out of there, we're all trying to get out of there as quickly as possible. I remember that I have a Talmud that knows how to drive this vehicle, Moshe Tzvi Shapiro, and he's up north, Bichlal. He's waiting for the invasion from Hezbollah. Right? So I whip out my phone, I call him up. Moshe Tzvi, how you doing? He says, Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi, how you doing? He said, listen, I need some help. I'm in a Namer. I need to know how to drive this thing. So he explains to me on the phone, right there, how to turn it on, how to operate it. It's very complicated. It's very technically involved in how to turn this thing on. But be that as it may, the details are not as important as the experience in that moment. The last time I saw this person, we were both in the Beit Midrash together in the Old City, talking about whatever Gemara the Beit Midrash was learning at the time. And then a few days later, we all run out to go face God knows what. We didn't know what was going to be. We didn't know what the next day was going to bring. And this is one moment we're sitting and learning together, and one moment we're out fighting together. And how long ago were the Jewish people in a state where they couldn't fathom such a scenario? It wasn't that long ago that the Jewish people were in a place where they couldn't fathom such a scenario. And the reason is because now we're different. We haven't left anything behind. God forbid, we haven't left anything behind. But we've evolved, and we've transcended and included. We've transcended and included everything from our past, but now we're in a different place. And this is the extent of the nechama, is not to negate any of the pain and tragedy that was experienced. It's not to negate, but it's rather to approach and grasp it with a different lens of understanding. Right? Abuseinu chatu, right? We made mistakes in the past. Aval anachnu lo nechata. We're not going to make those same mistakes. Minirashas Eretz Yisrael, and we will merit to inherit the land. That is the ultimate nechama. And every Tu B'Av, every 15th of Av, there is a resurgence of that original light of when that generation understood they don't have to be afraid anymore. That was that initial grasp. And every Tu B'Av, there's a resurgence of that. And that's why on every Tu B'Av, we have this immense, profound celebration that is, as the Mishnah says, Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael. There was no comparable celebration to the Jewish people other than this day. Right? The other day being Yom HaKippurim, which is the same energy. Yom HaKippurim, all that baggage is taken off of you. It's like, I don't have to live with this burden forever. It's the same thing. Realizing I don't have to live with this burden forever. I can be free from this burden. I can actually do it. Knowing that is the epitome of Yomim Tovim liYisrael. Right? It's something that I forgot to mention on Shabbat. All of the Shabbatot that have names, they all have names for the thing that's going to happen in the following week. So Shabbat HaGadol is because Pesach is that coming week. And Shabbat Shuvah is because Yom HaKippurim is the following week. What's Shabbat Nachamu for? Shabbat Nachamu is because Tu B'Av is that week. Right? It's letting you know that Tu B'Av is coming. It's true. Tu B'Av. It's possible for Tu B'Av to be before Shabbat Nachamu if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbat, but that's like the exception. Right? But it's called Shabbat Nachamu because it's telling you next week is the day of Nechama. Next week is the celebration of Nechama, and this is the holiday of Nechama. Again, not to be consoled, not to take the burden off of the tragedy. There's plenty of tragedy still as we speak to be very, very distraught about. It's not to take it away. It's not to take away the tragedy. It's to perceive and grasp the tragedy differently. And Bezrat Hashem, we should all merit to hold on very tight, very, very tight to this inspiration, to this divine inspiration, this Ruach HaKodesh of Nachamu, Nachamu Ami.